I once had an ex-friend ask me, "What is the scariest encounter you've ever had?" It's funny, when he asked me this, his dog Lexi was frantically licking my hand. Lexi absolutely loved me, and it wasn't just because I secretly fed her delicious dog treats. Dogs are pure souls, and one is even part of my story. Dogs really see into people's true nature. So anyway, I wiped the remaining chocolate off my hand and began to tell him the terrifying yet true tale. It all happened during my freshman year of college. I found myself driving through the deep south on a road trip I made to see my girlfriend Stephanie, who attended school in Alabama. The thought of surprising her and hooking up filled my heart with adventure. My parents weren't about to buy me another car, so I had to borrow my roommate's. I was so excited about the trip that I forgot to charge my cell phone. My phone died halfway into the impromptu road trip. I was slightly worried about not having a working phone, but I thought it was probably for the best. I wouldn't have to answer any calls from my roommate, and I could easily follow the road map I had. At least, that's what I thought. Unfortunately, it was just after 1 AM on a chilly, late fall night, and due to some bad road signs, I ended up taking the incorrect exit. I found myself in an almost pitch-black, run-down neighborhood with a flat tire. A single lamppost illuminated a house with a backyard full of something terrifying. A yard full of children's bicycles, some old, some newer, stacked in a haphazard way. Signs that I couldn't see clearly decorated the chain-link fence bordering the yard. I was frozen in fear in my car. The only noise was the loud rock music I had blaring from the speakers. I didn't know what to do. If my phone worked, I would have called someone. But whom? As I debated this question, I noticed the front door to a house closer to me open. Out stepped a haunting vision. An elderly woman in a soiled-looking nightgown with wild silvery hair, her icy gaze locked into mine. She picked up a broom next to her door and made her way towards me, one of her hands shakily raised to point a spell at me while her mouth opened partially on a half-drooping face. I could just barely hear her start to speak in a strange language. Suddenly, I saw the chained fence rattle, and a Doberman leapt across the street, barking ferociously. It ran towards the witch, distracting her while I gathered myself and sped off to the sound of screams. I eventually was able to change the tire and made it to Stephanie's, who was thankful I came to see her during her grandfather's funeral. I'm eternally grateful to that angel dog that made it all possible. Everyone keeps asking Brian about what happened to Bernadette. Brian, though, doesn't say anything, even though he was the last person to see her before she disappeared. Bernadette was a lovely old woman, and the whole community loved her. On the night of her disappearance, it showed on CCTV Brian coming out of her house and doing a little, slow dance on her front yard, all on his own. When a man demanded Brian to tell him where Bernadette was, Brian bent his fingers backwards, and he was in pain. Brian then started doing a slow dance on his own, twirling away. Then, when a woman angrily confronted Brian and she demanded to know where Bernadette was, all Brian would tell her was that he could not say. The woman wasn't having it, and she was shouting at him and swearing at him. Brian stayed strong throughout, and took all the shouting and accusations on the chin. Brian started choking up, and all he said was that, "I cannot say where she is," and when the woman replied that she didn't give a shit, Brian bent one of her fingers backwards. Then Brian started slow dancing on his own, like they did in World War II times in dance halls, before the soldiers were sent off to war. Eventually, the police took Brian into custody, and everyone was so pleased that the police had him. In Brian's cell, there was another prisoner. The prisoner was intrigued to know about Bernadette's disappearance, but Brian would only tell him that he could not say. The other prisoner was getting really excited and wanted to know about what had happened to her, but Brian just kept on ignoring him. The other prisoner told Brian that everyone thinks he did something to her, as he was the last person to see her and he went inside her house. Brian then replied to his prison cellmate by bending his finger backwards, and started dancing on his own. The other prisoners screamed, and Brian was taken to another cell. When a detective was questioning Brian, he kept demanding Brian to tell him about Bernadette. Brian kept replying that he couldn't, and the detective kept getting more loud, insisting that he should tell him. Brian then held the detective's hands and bent one of his fingers backwards. As the detective was crying in pain, he saw Brian dancing slowly on his own. The detective shouted in pain, "Where is Bernadette?" And Brian replied with, "Where is your bent finger pointing?" The detective's bent finger was pointing to the ceiling, and what he saw in the ceiling was Bernadette, floating with a menacing smile and an evil embrace. She had occult and ritualistic objects and markings on her naked, floating body. Brian told the detective, "She likes dancing. I'm distracting her with dancing. Get out, now." It all started when my family moved into this old farmhouse an old woman passed away in. It was creepy as hell, but it was big and it was cheap, and there was a lot of furniture left over after the estate sale. When we cleaned out the trash and dusted it, aired it out, and put in what furniture we had, it was actually a really beautiful home. My bedroom had a giant wardrobe with a big mirror in the door that was beautifully ornate. It was one of those old-fashioned silver-backed mirrors, and I loved looking at my reflection more than anything after we got settled, so I always left the door open. One night, after a long day of helping my parents and brother work on the garden, I flopped onto the bed, exhausted. I barely had the energy to pick up the book on my nightstand, and as I was nodding off reading, I thought I caught something out of the corner of my eye, in the mirror. It looked like my reflection moved in a way it didn't. I stopped and really stared at the mirror for a few minutes, even waving my arms and other silly things to try and catch my reflection doing something outside of my movements. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so I decided it was just my imagination and tired brain playing tricks on me. I decided to hop in the shower and go to bed. That night, I had the first nightmare about my mirror. I was standing in front of it, and my reflection smiled this unnaturally large, sinister smile at me. When I tried to look away, its hands shot out and pulled my head into the mirror, breaking the glass on my forehead, and blood ran down the glass. I screamed myself awake and decided to close the door for the rest of the night. The next day, the door was open, and I assumed my mother had done it because some fresh clothes were folded and put on the top drawer. I walked over and looked at the mirror for a long time. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, so decided to ignore my nightmare. After all, it was just a bad dream. I know my reflection can't move or hurt me. That's just a silly childish idea. Besides, even if she does move in ways she shouldn't, no matter how many bad dreams she gives me, she can't get out. When she moved into this room and opened that door, I jumped at the chance to swap places with her. This is my body now, and my family. She can't get out, and I'm never going back. She can scare me all she likes. I'm not giving up this amazing outside world. The reflection world is boring and dark, but this one is so bright and interesting. I can't wait to explore it. Hey guys, thanks for listening. If you want to hear more scary stories, please subscribe and I'll keep them coming. Until next time.